Hey everybody, it's Ken and John.
Before we start the show, we just wanted to make sure you heard on our last show the change in Omnibus. No change at all to you, the listener. The show's still delightful, the show's still free, but the show is now independent.
We are independent of our corporate masters. We pulled the ripcord.
That doesn't mean it's scary for us, but it means nothing to you except that if you would like to join us on our journey and support the new independent omnibus, you can now do so through the funding mechanism of Patreon.
Our Patreon account is patreon.com/omnibusproject. You can go there and join at several different tiers. Different
perks and privileges are in the works. For now, we just appreciate you early adopters who are hopping aboard with faith. The new independent omnibus that we're building is going to be cool.
Yeah, my operating principle is always donate at the level that makes you slightly uncomfortable about the amount of your contribution.
Thank you for your support of the new independent omnibus. The adventure is just beginning unless the cataclysm comes.
Bum, bum, bum.
This is Jim, and
receiving this message. We are Ken Jennings and John Roderick. We speak to you from our present, which we can only assume is your distant past, the turbulent time that was the early 21st century.
Fearing the great cataclysm that will surely befall our civilization, we began this monumental reference of strange and obscure human knowledge. These recordings represent our attempt to compile and preserve wonders and esoterica that would otherwise be lost.
So whether you're listening from an advanced civilization or have just reinvented the technology to decrypt our transmissions, this is our legacy to you.
This is our time capsule. This is the Omnibus.
You have accessed entry 494.LV2342, certificate number 38597. Fotomats.
When can I pick up the pictures?
Thursday.
Thursday. Okay, let me make a note of that.
You gonna write it down there?
Oh, well, it's going to.
Oh,
yeah.
well, then let's say Tuesday.
You mean 2 days earlier?
No, 5 days later.
5 days later. I thought as much.
If this customer were at a Fotomats store, we'd be introducing him to our brand new picture pickup promise. Fotomats' way of telling you exactly when your pictures will be ready.
That quick?
Sure, and if it doesn't work out, you get a free roll of film.
Oh, no. You get in trouble for
it's
that.
no problem.
Huh?
It's a Fotomat policy.
The Fotomat picture pickup promise.
Is there a Fotomat store around here?
Do you remember your first camera?
Yeah, it was cheap and bad, and I think it broke soon.
Huh?
I didn't really have a connection with many of my cameras. Like, I never got a nice one that I could take care of, and I was not the kind of kid who would.
Did you ever get a nice camera? Or did you transition right from bad cameras to bad phones?
I think I had like one pretty nice, like reasonable Canon in between that I kind of carried on some international travels.
I mean, your folks seem like they might have been the kind that had dad had a Canon at some point.
Like all parents that age, they had nice cameras, albums of family vacations. They were kind of camera hobbyists.
It's funny to think what a status symbol, what a sign of kind of bourgeois arrival, like a fancy camera was.
The one object you need to not be big and cumbersome, and they were so often. Nice cameras were big and cumbersome.
But this was before there was any kind of video camera, and before there were a lot of consumer electronics, no sort of Walkman or digital devices of any kind.
I certainly remember my first Polaroid, my family's first Polaroid, just seeming like it was a magic trick.
Right.
Like that was as cool as any Walkman or any other gadget I've ever seen in my life. The first time I saw an iPhone was good, but the first time I saw a Polaroid camera was probably better. How is it doing that?
My first camera was the first camera of a lot of people my generation, which was a Kodak Instamatic, a little plastic, sort of about the size of a pack of cigarettes, cigarettes, you know, an old hard pack of cigarettes. It had a lens that had a fixed focal length. When you looked through the viewfinder, it was just basically a plastic clear little look through. It didn't actually look through the lens.
They're probably not that different from the yellow cardboard one-use Kodak cameras that you still see at wedding receptions or whatever today.
Right. The difference was the film format. It actually came in a cartridge. I don't know if you remember these. They kind of looked like a pair of binoculars. It had it was just a single plastic cartridge that you stuck in the back and closed the door of your camera. And then you wound it after every shot with your little thumb winder. And then you'd pull the entire cartridge out. Whereas the disposable cameras were a 35 millimeter format. Those old Instamatic formats, it was a format called 126, Kodak 126.
I didn't realize it wasn't 35 millimeter.
No, and it's why old photos are so often a square format. 126 Instamatic film was called 126 because it was, after all the finishing happened, it was a 26 millimeter square photograph. And 35 millimeter as a format became more popular later on.
What explains the rounded corners on old photos? I've not thought about this since then, but I'm now wondering, why did they have? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think it might just be a little bit of flair.
We thought it looked fancy.
Yeah, I think they
cut off a tiny bit of your image. There's no optical reason, right?
No. Well, that's interesting. Whether the round. No, I don't think so. I think it was just a little bit of hospitaliano that they were putting on it.
Yeah, that's what we said. I mean, I don't want this whole episode to just be indulging in Boomer/Gen X nostalgia for like worse things.
Right.
But it really is hard to understate the difference in the culture when photography was kind of difficult, expensive, and rare. You know, you really prized your photographs. They were kind of a family artifact. They were even art.
Yeah.
As we were saying in the whichever entry that was, the monkey selfie entry, you would invite people over to look at your vacation photos like it was a gallery opening.
Yeah, and they would come under extreme duress, you know.
The joke is that it was boring. But it really was something you thought was worthy of showing people.
Let me show you what we saw on
Look,
vacation.
I made a hat.
My first Instamatic, I think the cartridges came in either 12 or 20 photos in a cartridge. And it was given to me by my dad, I think probably in about 1975. And the first trip I took out into the Alaskan bush, I brought my little Instamatic. And I still have the photos I took. And, you know, a lot of them are out of focus or weirdly framed. You know, I'm still getting an idea of like how to look through this thing. But I captured some really interesting moments. In fact, the first Long Winters record has a couple of photos I took.
No, from that first roll?
In that first roll, in the booklet of pictures. Take
kind of bad, weird photos as a kid in case you're ever in an indie band.
But I did that thing that we all used to do, which was on a flight. You know, when you see beautiful mountains, snow-covered mountains.
Out the window.
Yeah, point your Instamatic out the window and take some pictures. And I just lucked out. I got a couple of really nice pictures.
Yeah, I mean, I assume we're gonna get into this, how common it was to just see your photos, and many were bad, right?
So many were bad.
The world took just millions and millions of bad photos and did not know until weeks later.
It felt so empowering to have a camera because cameras and photos were such a important part of adult culture, right? I mean, sitting around, I can't tell you how many evenings we sat around and looked at our own photo albums and somehow never got tired of flipping the pages and like, oh, remember that car?
I mean, it's isomorphic to Instagram. It's exactly, you know, Facebook does the same thing when they're like, check out where you were 5 years ago on this date.
It's the same.
It's bringing out the old family album.
And having that camera, I felt like it gave me some status with other kids. Like I had a camera.
How old were you?
I was 7, 8. Because other kids then immediately, as they saw my camera, they all lined up. They wanted me to take their picture.
It's like you're in some developing world village.
Yeah, except it was my friends. And I still have those pictures too. But it's funny what you say about the scarcity being such a component of it. A lot of those rolls that I took, I didn't end up taking 12 pictures at the same event. I would take a picture, and then 2 weeks later,
you really pick your spots.
Another picture. You do, and it's a little sad in that there are a lot of pictures from that time where I really wish I had the 5 pictures on either side of it too, because I remember the day, and whatever moment I chose to line 3 people up against a fence and take their picture, that wasn't really sufficient to capture the memory. I have a good friend who took a bunch of pictures of Elliott Smith very early on. Her name is Autumn DeWild. She's a well-known rock photographer and fashion photographer. Mm-hmm. And Autumn she always seemed to be where things were happening. And she has this story. I've seen the sheet. The first roll of film that she spent taking pictures of Elliott Smith, the first 4 or 5 pictures on the roll are of her cat and some signs that she saw on the road.
Did the cat take the picture?
Then there are like 8 pictures of Elliott, and then there are 5 more at the end of some stuff she was documenting that she was going to give away to Goodwill or whatever. And she looks at it now. She looks at the contact sheet and is just like, "Oh my God! If only I had just used every piece, every shot on that roll, I would have twice as many pictures of Elliott Smith from those very early days."
In hindsight, it's very clear that photography really made no sense until it was digital. Like, digital photography is exactly what you want. You don't know what the image is, so it's abundant and cheap until you get the right image. Like, photography works as a lifestyle choice digitally, and it really didn't before. It worked as an art form, but we were just kind of making do with really a terrible, terrible technology.
Unless you recognized as a professional photographer that your job was to just burn film, right? And I think Autumn tells that story because she realized not very much longer that in a situation like that, conserving shots is a false economy, and you just go in and you take all the pictures.
I wish I had a better sense of exactly how it felt. Film felt expensive to me, but I was a high schooler and college student. It was not a trivial expense.
Film was expensive, and developing it was expensive. And that was what Instamatic film and 126 film was cheaper to buy and cheaper to develop than. 35 millimeter was a transition to a kind of prosumer culture where Canon and these companies were selling much nicer cameras, and they used this more flexible film format. But of course, they were just selling these things to dumb suburban dads for the most part, who were doing point and click photography. My dad had a camera fixation, and just the smallest, because like a lot of prosumer stuff, it's like, now you have all this control over f-stop and all of it just baffled my dad. All he wanted was
there weren't even digital menus back then, so the interface was terrible to change the shutter speed or
just
stop
go
or
look at the
exposure.
And you had to read the manual, which of course no one ever did.
Right.
And as those 35 millimeter cameras evolved, then they started to get autofocus. They started to get to automatic exposure and stuff, which benefited all these people that didn't know how to really use a camera.
Nearly all people needed that.
Nearly all people. But a big part of the expense and the problem, the challenge of having your little Instamatic or any kind of camera in the 60s and 70s was that you had to take that film in to be developed. You were not somebody who had a home dark room. And so you had to take your film to be processed to the photo processing place.
Did you see the thing that was going around social media this week? I think maybe it's a clip from TV's Stranger Things where somebody's asking, okay, explain to me what's happening here. I've seen it happen on the show, and I get that he has to take his pictures into this red room and put some kind of water on them. And I get that that's how you get pictures, but what's happening here?
This was somebody's post?
Yeah, this guy went viral for just his sincere question. he's refining his photos or something. He puts the photos in water and somehow that makes it more clear. Is this an old film technique? And if so, what is it called?
I love this so much.
That he like what magical thing is he doing with the water? That's the only way pictures existed.
Did you ever spend any time in a darkroom yourself?
I was a high school yearbook editor.
You were?
So I had a photographer. I had access to a darkroom.
Editor.
I was not please hold your applause until the end of the show.
Wait a minute.
It's a lot of power.
It changes everything now.
It explains a lot about my like design and typography obsession, I guess.
Well, and the fact that you wear that green visor every time we do this show.
Why are you wearing the acetate visor? So I had access to a darkroom, but I was never a photography guy. I would go in there with the photographers and, kind of hope that stuff came out right. And I hated the smell. My main memory of darkrooms of that era is that weird kind of vinegary or sulfurous smell of the chemically development solution.
This is so interesting because I was editor of the high school newspaper at East Anchorage High School.
So my friends were
Zephyr.
My friends were newspaper editor, the Spirit, and they let me do the cartoons, but like I got yearbook instead.
Well, and it was a real tragedy in my own life because I spent most of my high school years preparing to be editor of the Zephyr.
You knew this was your destiny.
It was my density, and then my junior year I was entertainment editor of the Zephyr, and the newspaper teacher, the advisor, said that he was burned out. And he was not going to teach newspaper next year. And my school, East Anchorage High School, hired a carpetbagger, a young woman who...
Is that what you call people not from Alaska?
Not from East. Oh. Somebody who used to teach at Bartlett or something.
I thought she was coming up from Florida or
She
something.
was some young woman who arrived at the school, and I went down
Was it Sarah Palin?
She had a Sarah Palin-esque vibe. I went to East a week or 10 days before school started, specifically to go find the new newspaper teacher. And I went into the building and she was there unpacking a box or something. I mean, this is how dedicated I was to this, that I was there.
Sure. Summer.
Still in summer. And said, "Hi, I'm John Roderick. I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm going to be the editor of the Zephyr next year. And I thought we should get to know each other and start putting together a plan for the paper." And she said, "Oh, well, my plan is that I'm going to be the editor of the Zephyr. And so you're welcome to submit your material."
Her high school dreams did not come true, and she was going to...
And at the time, I thought she was a middle-aged person. I'm sure she was 24. But the idea that she would take this job as editor of or as newspaper teacher, and that her take on that was... Here, this incoming senior who's worked on the paper for 4 years and introduces himself as the new editor because there had always been a line of succession.
Orderly transition of power.
Right. And there was an editor and then the entertainment editor and then he or she became the editor, and it was, and when last year's teacher said, "I'm not teaching it anymore," like it was clear that that the newspaper was in good hands, right? Because I was so devoted to it. It was the only class I did well. And so it was devastating to me.
She was serious. She edited the paper.
Not only was she serious, but then halfway through first quarter, she decided she was going to appoint a student editor, and she appointed my girlfriend, Kelly, who was not at all interested in newspaper, had only taken the class that year in order to pad her transcript so that she could get into an Ivy League college. And she couldn't have been less interested. And it was absolutely this teacher decided she was going to teach me a lesson. It was an early example of her. She objected so much to my presumption that I was the editor that she was going to teach me a lifelong lesson, which she has. And I'm now still mad at her about it.
I think my wife has some crazy story about her high school putting on a spring musical and having the teachers play. They did like Annie or Oliver, and they had the teachers play all the adult parts. Yeah. And the kids got to be the orphans in Annie or Oliver or whatever it was.
These are teachers that don't understand 100% the concept of
high school,
of school.
Their high school went so bad, they need to recreate it and perfect it for themselves later in life.
Well, and what happened to me at the Zephyr was that the teacher lost interest. My girlfriend Kelly had no interest in it, and I ended up editing
De facto.
I was there every Thursday night until 10 p.m. Working on the light board, all by way of saying I spent a lot of time in the dark room
With Kelly.
Not with Kelly. By that point in time, Kelly was going out with David Brust, and we were done Splitsville.
I'm going to go listen to his podcast. Seems like he's kind of the winner in this scenario.
No, I think David is still selling like natural food at the Cars grocery on DeBar.
That's very specific. What a hilarious reference for our Alaska listeners.
Anyway, the freedom and the power that came from being able to actually go into a dark room and not only develop your film, but print your prints the way you wanted.
Something visceral about seeing the image appear must be very powerful.
Not only that, but as you were saying about digital stuff, we now have all these powers to crop and enhance and color modify.
Just take it for granted. You do it all with like two fingers while you're watching TV with your other eye.
But in the old days, if you framed that photo in weirdly, or if there's somebody in the background, I mean, you were stuck with it. But to have that high school darkroom power to go in and say, enlarge, enhance, move this over here, clip, go around Leon's shoulder and see if you can find a fish scale.
That part doesn't even work.
It's not. It shouldn't.
It's in 3D. How are they seeing a different part of the room?
It's the future.
Never mind.
So that was absolutely formative for me. The power and it was and up until that time, developing film was it's not only seemed magical, but in most cases you took it and dropped it off and came back several days later. And only then did you even know whether you had succeeded in capturing your daughter's wedding or...
You'd forgotten what all the pictures were, so at least there was that moment of surprise, like, oh, right, I took the camera that day, or, oh, look, the kid stole the camera and took this picture. It was much more of a dramatic reveal. It was more of a reality show style experience.
Well, as you can imagine, where there is a need, there will be, at least in America, a commercial enterprise to fill that
capitalism. Need. You got to love it.
You do have to love it.
Nothing wrong with it.
One nice thing about the Instamatic and the 126 film format was it really popularized, the pocket camera, just as Kodak had done earlier with its Brownie camera. They kept coming out with new products that made taking pictures easier. And I'm sure in 1965, nothing seemed easier than putting this preloaded cartridge in the back of your plastic camera, pointing it, pushing a button, and then popping that cartridge out and handing it off to somebody. Like it wow.
Imagine it. Can you still have the muscle memory of using your thumb to advance?
Oh, yeah.
There it is.
In 1965, a man by the name of Preston Fleet, who was nicknamed Sandy Fleet, and that's
isn't Preston Fleet better than Sandy Fleet?
Preston Fleet is great. Sandy Fleet sounds like the name of a woman of the night who's working in a Navy town.
Sandy Fleet is when they find all those ships in the desert in Close Encounters.
Oh, right. Sandy Fleet realized that there was a need for fast photo processing made simple and easy for people.
What would you do at the time? Go to a dedicated camera shop?
A camera
shop? Would you go to a drugstore? My memories are very much drugstore centric.
Drugstores, I think, started doing film processing later. Huh. It was a specialty.
You'd have to go to a weird store run by a weird Radio Shack guy?
Yeah, that was selling all kinds of camera equipment, and they would develop your film.
And they would do it maybe on site even.
Well, yeah, but like the film developing process hadn't yet become completely automated. So it did require a certain amount of person with a dark bag who would, because if it exposed film, you can't have any light touch it, right? So all of the processing, once you open that
I've seen Stranger Things. I know how this works.
Right. You have to put it in water. Water clarifies the picture. But you see shots in dark rooms with that red light on, but you can't have that red light on until the film itself has been.
That's got to be in complete darkness coming out of the cartridge or whatever the thing.
The red light is only to watch the prints.
No, the red light's for the police, not Prince.
Well, there's a red light. There's a red light over yonder. So Preston Fleet, as was the style at the time, thought, how do I make this easy for Americans so that they don't have to get out of their cars? And at
the time, getting out of your car was a headache. People were always thinking they would streamline automotive America by letting you eat a burger in your car.
In your car?
What else could you do in your car?
You go to the bank.
That's right. You never leave the bank.
You could go to the drugstore. In various places in America, there were on the East Coast in particular. We didn't have these in the West, but there were drive-through liquor stores.
That seems a little tricky.
There was one in Anchorage, a drive-through liquor store, but I've never seen one here in Washington. And there are
You can see why legislatively people might be against it.
Yeah, it seems like not a thing. There are drive-through dairy stores in the East.
Like if you're driving your car, you need some cottage cheese.
You go to the dairy store, get some milk and butter.
Drive-through bowling alleys.
I think you're making that up. In the UK, I think the first drive-through grocery store is maybe a little bit more of a.
Well, everything has come full circle now. Like in Seattle, Amazon is kind of piloting these new grocery stores where you make your complete order online. I need 6 tomatoes. I need 3 cans of cream of mushroom soup, and then you drive into a little booth, and some guy's got your groceries all ready to go.
Yeah.
It's they
even that sounds like old fashioned compared to just like put your order in and it shows up at your door.
Why is the drone not bringing me cream of mushroom soup?
Merlin Mann orders toilet paper and it shows up on his doorstep an hour later, and I'm like, you need to go to the store sometimes.
I mean, it's not just bad socially. Like the carbon footprint is probably not great. That all this stuff is now being delivered one item at a time. The second I realize I'm out of fabric softener,
right. But there's a difference in America, and this should be made clear to futurelings, between a drive-through and a drive-in. Drive-throughs are ones where you go up in your car, you order. The first, I think, fast food restaurant that really popularized the drive-through was the Jack in the Box. And it was super confusing to people because the speaker, I don't know if you remember this, the speaker that you talked into was actually the Jack in the Box head.
Guy.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then the guy would talk back to you.
Because they thought no one would talk to a thing that looked like a microphone.
Right.
You need to Jack in the Box there.
So this horrifying clown head, you would kind of pull around the side of this building and there would be this clown just like, and you'd walk up and it would say, hello, may I help you?
I guess we haven't put drive-in movies in the omnibus. That's kind of the weirdest thing of all. Like, people love movies, but they hate getting out of their cars.
Yeah.
What if you watched a movie through the windshield of your car?
Sitting in your super comfortable car.
Yeah, what is the idea that movie theater seats were so bad back then you would want your Chrysler instead?
Well,
because the sound is worse.
Cars were super nice to sit in back then, big cushy seats, but also you could be in your pajamas, you could bring your own food. Yeah, it was, we loved our cars. We used to, before they became all garbage cars like now. But drive-in restaurants were, of course, a big
like
thing.
Somebody in roller skates bringing over a tray of...
You could eat in your car, which is a thing I really don't understand.
Yeah, like it's...
My stinky car.
I'm very skeptical that no matter how nice your car seats are, it's really the right vibe for any of these things. Watching a movie, eating fried chicken. It just seems like the car's job is done when you're there. It did its time. It's time to move on and actually go in the drugstore now.
Well, so the idea that getting your pictures processed would be a thing you'd like to do as part of as a component of running errands was actually pretty prescient of Preston Fleet. Prescient Preston, they called it.
It's funny that they wouldn't say prescient Preston or prescient Preston.
Oh, right. Prescient. Is that how you actually pronounce it? Prescient rather than prescient?
I think that's prescient.
Prescient Preston.
Aren't prescients like militaristic Germans?
Prescient Prussian Preston.
This is like a mic check now. I'm actually going to look up.
You're going to look this up?
How you say
prescient. Beep, beep, beep.
It is prescient first, alternately prescient, alternately either with scient instead of scient.
I'm vindicated.
Yes.
Prescient is valid.
Yeah, but, really, Preston should have chosen the pronunciation that made the nickname funnier.
Anyway, Preston, or Sandy as we like to call him, is one of the inventors of, wait for it, WD-40.
Really?
He made his big impact in the world inventing WD-40.
Do you know what the WD stands for?
What?
Water displacement.
Really?
I guess because it's, it slides its slippery stuff in there and replaces the water with something more lubricating.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
And it must have been the 40th try. He must have had 39 unsuccessful little doorknob lubricators.
Well, let that be a lesson to you as you're trying to invent a lubricator.
Don't give up.
Lubricator.
Don't give up after the 39th one.
Yeah, you get to 39 and you're like, I'm done. No, keep trying. So Preston invented the notion of the drive-thru film processing kiosk.
This is going to seem so crazy for anyone under 40. Like, do we really have film to develop often enough that you need a drive-through window for it?
The answer is yes.
Apparently,
and
yes.
Here's what's crazy to a modern listener or to a futureling is that you gave the film to the person in the photomat. The photomat, let's describe it. It's a little hut. It has a hut roof, a gold-colored roof that can only be described as a hut roof. And you'll recognize it because if you see a Pizza Hut restaurant,
right, it's the same.
It's a giant photomat. It's the same exact style. I don't know why that roof is a hut roof, but it's kind of Polynesian looking, except gold. The
Pizza Hut, it's red.
Pizza Hut, it's red. The photomat is only big enough for one person at a time. It's almost entirely glass window encased, except for the hut roof. And you can basically sit in there on a stool.
A single cashier sitting there waiting for you.
There's I think, windows on both sides so people could drive up from either side. And you would drive up and
you'd say, 24 photos of my family, please.
That's right. The photomat employee, they tried to hire mostly college girls, in which case they were called photomates.
Wait, no.
Sorry, I'm afraid so. And if they were boys, they were called photomacs.
MAC.
Yeah. So a college guy is called a Mac, and the college
girl
gal is a mate.
You're supposed to imagine that this cashier you're handing your film to is your mate.
Your little mate.
That's awful.
She had they had uniforms, little stewardess outfits, basically, and you would hand her your film. She would write your name and information down on an envelope.
She can't develop it there.
There's absolutely no film development capacity there. The film is picked up by a courier.
This thing could do any business that has a courier come.
That's right.
But for some reason, it's doing film.
Photos. Because as you say, there are taking pictures is that popular.
It's a common errand. Like, you got to run to the bank, and you've got to run to the grocery store, and you got to pick up your photos.
You got to pick up your photos or drop off your photos.
You've just got a constant stream of photos to develop.
And that's what we said. Drop them off or pick them up, right? You got to pick up your photos, drop off your photos. And then what made Fotomat innovative was that it was a 24-hour turnaround. You were going to drop off your photos, you come back.
That's quicker than other places could do.
Quicker than anywhere. That was, I guess, the Fotomat promise.
This place caught on. Do you have any sense of how many Fotomats there were?
At the heyday, there were over 4,000 Fotomats in parking lots around America.
I guess rent is cheap. Overhead's cheap because you're just renting. A mall will happily rent you 2 parking spaces.
Fotomates and Photomax reported that it was a fine job, except one crucial thing that the Fotomat building cannot support: a bathroom.
Oh.
So if you worked at the Fotomat, you had to go find a place at a neighboring business that would allow you to use the potty. I can only imagine that for most people that was fine, but there was always that one person in Rochester, New York, who the neighboring restaurant wouldn't let him use the bathroom.
You'd think Rochester would be more supportive of photography in general.
I'm sure in Rochester they were well loved.
My mom, her first job out of high school was working at a Fotomat clone, a local Seattle area Fotomat clone called Snappy Photo.
Get out.
Or I think it was Snap-E-Photo in the style of the time. Photomat, by the way, is with an F. I don't know if that's clear to listeners.
F-O-T-O-Mat. Fotomat.
Streamlined pronunciation was very big in America. Like, this was the American century, and we were going to spell night, N-I-T-E, and through T-H-R-U.
Get to the point. That's right.
Get to the end. No silent letters.
Don't bore us. Get to the chorus.
We don't need that G-H. Her friends all called it Crappy Photo, owned.
Lol.
But she would sit in this little 5 foot by 5 foot space for an 8-hour shift. And it was an ideal summer or college job because she would just do her homework.
Yeah.
Until
people would drive up.
People would drive. Occasionally somebody would drive. And all she would have to do would be like to file it in an envelope, or if they wanted their film, to find the envelope they filed it.
Was she a snappy mate?
I don't think they had names.
Oh.
Snappy Kathy?
Snappy Kathy.
I'm not sure. They did have a funny uniform. In their case, it was, she says, some kind of red wool jumper over a gold nylon turtleneck.
Okay.
Which, amazing.
Sounds like the uniform for Hot Dog on a Stick. You remember them?
Yeah, they had the gold hats.
Yeah, they did.
She loved it. The film would be, she was up in Linwood. There were like 4 of these Seattle-wide. She was up in Linwood somewhere on Highway 99. And they would take the film. Every day somebody would come up in a truck and pick up all the film and take it to some lab like 2 hours south in Centralia, Chehalis area.
Wow.
And I don't know why. That's cheap developing.
Right.
Drive it back up to Seattle. And I think in their case, it may not have been 24-hour.
I think the 24-hour thing became a way that they were trying to develop a competitive advantage.
As it were.
Lol. That's another lol. You're getting a lot of lols out of me today.
My mom said it was a great job. I think my dad would come over when he was done with doing his janitorial stuff at Sandpoint Naval Base, which was his job, and maybe they would canoodle in the Fotomat or the off-brand Fotomat. She said the only downside was she got robbed twice.
Oh, right. You could see that they're all by themselves.
Yeah,
out
there's
there.
just one photo mate just sitting there with a bunch of cash, the day's cash. So she got robbed, I think twice, maybe by the same guy. And she said the only thing that made her nervous was he clearly was new to the gig. And
he's a bad robber.
Not a good, like, you want to be in good hands when somebody's robbing you.
That's right.
And this guy was like nervous, gun hands shaking, and she was afraid something was going to go wrong.
Uncool.
Don't hold up the photo mate. She's here to serve you.
Well, Fotomats were, for both of us, right, a real feature of the landscape.
You didn't even think twice when you saw a photo developing place in a parking lot. Not even developing, a photo receiving place.
And distributing place. But by the late 70s, 35 millimeter cameras were becoming more and more fashionable, and it's one of those situations where I think the number of Fotomats peaked right about 1980, when the decline of what had made Fotomats popular, kind of, you could see the writing was on the wall. What times were changing.
What technologically overtook them?
Well, a couple of different things. One of them was photo processing technology started to become more widely. The processing was more automated, and the scale of the equipment started to become a manageable size.
Yeah, I've seen those machines. You would go to a place and they'd have a machine there where they could feed in a roll of film, and the machine could make whatever decisions.
Right. The machine is called a mini lab.
And
mini labs were this kind of containerized, or compartmentalized little. You could slot a mini lab into a mall or a photo place and have those pictures back. What
same day, 1 hour?
Yeah, what increasingly became 1 hour, but same day photos at first, and all of that made it very difficult for to make a justification to go drop your stuff off at this Fotomat.
A hut is rarely the end of technological progression. Right. Usually, if you see a hut, something better is coming. Like if you see a Pizza Hut, you should be eating somewhere better.
But also, Fotomat was franchising, and they were so excited by the growth of their enterprise that they really over expanded. In 1981, the then president of Fotomat, Richard Irwin, said in an interview with a surprising degree of candor that you wish you saw from business people today. He said, the biggest single factor in our, in the decline of our business was our own ineptitude. I was like, when I read that, I said, Richard Irwin, wherever you are now, I wish you were running a bigger company.
Was this after the Chapter 11 declaration? You don't usually see somebody use the word ineptitude to stockholders.
No, they hadn't. So they tried to pivot, and in 1979, they became the first place where you could, or they became a very early place where you could rent VHS tapes.
They literally pivoted to video?
They tried.
To Blockbuster. They were the first Blockbuster. Was it a hut? You would pull up and be like...
Well, it was the same huts.
You'd pull up and be like, do you have Ordinary People?
No, they had a list of available titles that you would look at, like a catalog. Mm-hmm. You would look at those. You would pick the title that you wanted, and you would order it, and then it would arrive...
Oh, they didn't have it on site. You'd have to come back later, and they'd have found a Betamax version of the Apple Dumpling Gang for you.
You're right. So you'd look at the catalog. You'd call them on the phone, tell them the movie that you wanted, and then you would arrive. You'd go to the Fotomat the following day, and there would be the movie. Now the movies were $12, which was $40 in 1980 dollars,
and it was still just a brief rental.
It was a week. You could have it for a week. And eventually they went to a $10 for a week-long rental. And as you remember, like renting a movie for a week was a real selling point at the time, because either it was going to take you a week to watch it, or maybe you'd watch it 3 times. I don't know.
Get your money's worth.
Why the hell would you want 5 days? It was just that you didn't want to have to take it back.
That whole rental market made the pricing very weird. Like studios... In the early days of video rental as an industry, the studios would price their new movies at like $90 or $110 for a while, so that nobody could buy their own copy at home. So you'd have to go through one of these rental chains to see your movie.
And that's what happened here. Paramount Pictures made a contract with Fotomat to supply Paramount films.
Your favorite Paramount films?
Yeah.
Raiders of the Lost Ark?
They couldn't get all the other studios to sign on. For a while, there were some Fotomat exclusive releases, which is
it's just like Netflix today. The only way to see this movie, you guys, is to go to your local Fotomat.
There was a movie about Pogo, the Walt Kelly character. Speaking of Little Abner's grandmother.
I love Pogo. Was it like a cartoon? Is it the one where he runs for president?
It's called I Go Pogo.
Oh, right.
That was
the slogan. People had I Go Pogo t-shirts.
Yeah, and that film was available exclusively at Fotomat.
Does that explain why you and I have never seen I Go Pogo? Because we have not been getting our movies from Fotomat?
I guess so. We missed our big.
It is claymation, by the way.
Nice.
I'm looking at a still of it now, and it looks not unlike Will Vinton's work.
But the first Walt Disney movies you could rent were through Fotomat kiosks.
Interesting.
This was their, And so, but again, they were victims of the changing times. And by the mid-'80s, you could rent VHS tapes everywhere you looked.
I mean, just being a little guy first adopter like that doesn't always work, because as soon as somebody looks over and says, hey, wait, they're getting movies in a parking lot now. There's no reason that a photo hut should be controlling that industry.
Yeah, and like you said, the drugstore now was doing 1-hour photo development, and you could, and Blockbuster, obviously, Blockbuster then had the model of come in, we have every movie you've ever seen, and you pick it up and go, and they stayed on top of that heap for another couple of decades. But by 1983, the 4,000 Fotomats had dwindled to 1,000 Fotomats, and then kind of hilariously, they went through a series of new owners, all at the wrong moment. Like Konica, the Japanese company, bought Fotomat in 1986, where it was like, 86 is not the time to get into the drive-up photo business. And so eventually it was all, it was all shut down. But the photo booths, the mats themselves, the huts, if you will, in a lot of cases were torn down, bulldozed, papered over.
They probably had foundations, but not much of one, probably easy enough to remove and pave over.
And I'm sure plenty of people took them and turned them into chicken coops or children's playhouses or whatever else.
To this day, can you drive around rural America and spot the turkey coop that's a Fotomat?
Well, you don't have to go that far because there are still Fotomat booths in parking lots, in situ.
In situ, as it were.
Performing a variety of functions as a kind of starter incubator spot for people that are starting businesses. They are watch repair places and places that you go to drop off your tailoring.
Because the rent is probably super cheap.
Super cheap. There aren't a lot of businesses that can do it. They're great little coffee kiosks, although it's often, you have to have some exterior plumbing or, there has to be water there if you're going to make espresso. But you can find them now all across North America used for these different purposes. And a lot of them are still standing, but kind of abandoned, papered over, used as little billboards. But we're so accustomed to seeing them now, and they've lost their brand coloration and have become they're just painted every which way. And they are an artifact that oftentimes the eye just wanders over without seeing, without acknowledging, especially since there are so many kind of kiosk-y places.
It's funny how, it doesn't matter how ubiquitous it is. If it's not relevant to you, you just don't see it.
Think about how many
I don't see elderly people, for example.
I know.
It's the same. It's going to happen to us all.
How many blue mailboxes are still bolted to the street corners in cities that you don't notice it unless you're leaning against one in a parade?
Purloined letter effect.
But there are I don't know where the nearest kiosk to us is, but I'm sure that there are Instagram accounts.
There's probably a website that lets you map your closest old Fotomat.
But there were 4,000 of them at one time.
They once roamed the plains like the sky was black with them.
So like the buffalo, like the passenger pigeon, they are once an icon that once filled America's skies. That the passage of time has rendered either extinct, obsolete, or just a more expensive and less good tasting hamburger.
Let's go find a espresso place that's a former Fotomat and just chat with the barista, or as I like to call her, the coffee mate.
The coffee mate.
And that concludes Fotomats. Entry 494.LV2342, certificate number 38597, in the omnibus. Futurelings, the omnibus is now an independent concern, and our connection with you, our listeners in any era, is more important than ever. We hope to that end that you will follow us on social media, interact with us despite your distaste for the wreckage it left in its wake. In our era, and we hope in yours as well, we were in archives in your era, we were at Omnibus Project. Anywhere you care to look for us. I was at Ken Jennings on Twitter. John was at John Roderick on Twitter and Instagram. There was a delightful community of listeners called the Futurelings. You could find that page on Facebook. Come join the fun. I'm sure they'll be publishing photos of old Fotomats immediately. We will never see another Christian Science reading room on that forum now that they have a new white whale. We received physical mail. Somebody sent you glasses frames.
They did.
Somebody literally sent John glasses frames.
They did. They're lovely.
Or a postcard. I don't know if I talked about this one. This is a very confusing note about the Lackawanna Railroad in Scranton, Pennsylvania. It's got a little poem on the front about Phoebe's bright linen white dress that couldn't exist without the coal that's powering her train.
The coal that's powering her train, eh?
But if you know what I mean. But then on the back, the poem has been expanded to 6 lines, and it's not clear whether this is an expansion by the sender, whoever sent us this from Johnstown, Pennsylvania, or whether he just has access to a longer version of the poem about Phoebe. But we get great stuff like this, and we appreciate it. If you want to send something digital, you could just scan your postcard and send it to our email inbox, which was the omnibusproject@gmail.com. If you wanted to send material support for the podcast, we can eBay all the glasses frames we want, but that's not going to keep the lights on, John.
No, it's true. Like the gold fillings in your now decaying mouth. No, don't send those. No, actually, it's just gold.
If you dig up a gold hat,
if you dig up a gold hat, man, we will take it.
First, use it to predict an eclipse or a solstice, but then when you're bored with that, send it to us. Send us your used gold hats.
I can think of so many things that you could find in your granddad's closet that you could send us. Coin collection, stamp collection.
Do you think this is how we should fund the omnibus now on Goodwill stuff?
I'm 100% down with that.
We would be the only podcast to monetize using that method.
Funded entirely by
from your attic,
your dad's attic.
But if you just want to send a digital financial contribution, it's very easy to do that at patreon.com/omnibusproject. You can decide which tier of generous Omnibus Futureling listener you are, and that makes you a part of our community and continues to power the entries.
Yeah, let your freak flags fly, y'all. Speaking of y'all, Futurelings, from our vantage point in your distant past, parked out in front of a long-closed photomat, trying to get the attention of a ghost photomate inside, and ask her if she can make us some coffee.
Did she die there?
Ken doesn't even drink coffee.
Did the photomate die in the booth?
I think that every photomat booth is inhabited by the ghost of a former employee who didn't die, but who left a little part of herself there.
Like a photographic negative.
That's
sort
right.
of,
Just like a ghost image.
Oh.
We have no idea how long these ghost images will survive, but we hope and pray that the catastrophe that we fear may never come. The phrasing of that sentence needs a little reworking, I think. We hope and pray that the catastrophe we fear may never come.
We hope and fear that the catastrophe we pray
may never
We
come.
pray and fear that the catastrophe we hope.
The catastrophe we hope and pray and fear.
We fear this catastrophe, but we hope and pray that it may never come.
There it is. There it is.
Recast
That's nice.
the sentence.
We fear that this catastrophe, which we hope and pray may never come, will come.
That's perfect.
But if the worst comes soon, this recording, like all our recordings, may be our final word. Also, like all our, that's a little bit of a vowel, like spirochete.
As with all, no, that's worse.
Yeah, as with all our.
Every one of our, do you prefer it?
Like this recording, like every one of our recordings, may be our final word. But if Providence allows, we hope to be back with you soon for another entry in the Omnibus.